You're welcome back. And a lot of protests that Bright Simmons should be giving a lot more time to speak on men's gold. All right, this is end of the year show. We have so many issues that we need to be able to, discuss. So please forgive us. And thank you very much for the overwhelming endorsement of the quality of the panel. Thank you. You've not seen anything yet. Guess what? Who is in the studio next? Now, we're talking about the new regions that have been created, 6 of them. So we're looking at the processes that led up to the creation and ask the question whether or not the creation holds the magic for local development, because that is supposed to be the major point, the core reason. If you read the Commission's report, Justice Brobe Commission's report, they say that was the core reason. So help me welcome Professor H. Kwesi Prempeh, who is the new boss at CDD. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
Great to have you always. Now, Clara is still here, Isan Kuma is here. We will do this up to about, we're supposed to end at about 11:35, we'll try. And then after that, we have the very final segment where we will be joined by Bryce Simmons, who will be back, and then we'll have Justice Emil Short also join us to talk about corruption and the commitment to that fight. We'll try and look at a number of the cases that came up and how they have been handled, whether there is any proof of a commitment to fight corruption in Ghana. Right, so, Prof, the president met the press recently. I can't start without asking you about that. Met the press recently, and I remember when you were appointed to succeed Professor Jimabwedi.
That's correct.
The president congratulated you.
That's correct.
He had some very nice words to say of hope. Do you remember them?
Well, I don't remember the exact words.
Okay.
But he expressed well, he said CDD has found a great replacement for Professor Jima and all of that, and that stuff like that.
Great.
Nice words.
Right. In other words, his speech writer likes him.
You could put it that way.
Stop it.
Stop it. You could put it that way.
You remember how many times the president has referenced Occupy Ghana and applauded the work?
Yeah, his speech writer likes us too.
Okay.
The same speech. I'm sure it's the same speech writer. I wonder who he is.
So what played out at his meeting with the press, did you find that to be out of the abundance of the heart? To mean that even the invitations that have been extended to civil society over the time to meet with the president and share ideas, he does not exactly believe in them because he said, you guys are noise-making, distracting bunch of guys. You are here to do so on the regions today?
I hope not. I hope not.
You hope not?
No, I think of course the president has multiple. When he speaks in public,
right.
I'm sure he's speaking to multiple constituencies, and he pitches his language and his speech to, I guess, to a particular. I mean, I know from meetings with the president that he doesn't feel that way about think tanks, and about CSOs. We do a lot of work with government. In fact, we're not adversaries of government at all. That's not what we're primed to do. When we do research, we do studies, we always make them available to government. We invite them, we sit down, we discuss. They take on board some of the recommendations. Some of the work we do is essentially almost a subsidy to government, because we fill in gaps, areas where government basically may not be able to actually to get to, or its resources might not allow it. We actually do some of those things. So it's a bit surprising that he would make that kind of a remark publicly. But I don't take it as a remark that was addressed to us. It might be addressed to some foot soldiers.
Okay, all right. Now, this is why I asked that question. I've heard you make a couple of comments about the creation of the regions and the need for them. Okay, so the president will not be excited to hear you repeat them on the show this morning. The president received a petition, or petitions, six petitions.
That's correct.
And what a coincidence. In the manifesto of the MPP, they promised to create new regions. In the NDC, they also promised to create new regions. And immediately he came into power, the petitions came, 6 of them from 4 regions. Then he forwards them to the Council of States, it returns, he takes advice, he appoints a commission. The commission goes round to do what the Constitution says it should do. Determine whether there is need and substantial demand. They confirm that there is need and substantial demand. Somebody goes to the Supreme Court, says, no, those who must vote must be the entire region and not those who did the petition. I've heard guys like you and Professor Kwekwaza say that is such an absurdity and that the Supreme Court abdicated its functions by not looking into that petition. Because you say, if those who petitions are the ones to vote, then what's the point in voting? Can you help us understand your point?
There are 2 issues. On one, I diverge from Professor Sari's view. On the other, we converge. So on the first one, my own views as to who should vote were a bit unformed until I took a chance. I mean, I took the opportunity to look at the Constitution closely, and I came to the conclusion, a conclusion different from Professor Sari's, that in fact, for better or worse, the Constitution contemplates that the voting population in the referendum would be those in the proposed new regions.
So he says that's waste of money. If they want it, why ask them to vote again?
Yeah, I think, which is why the voting is really about measuring the substantiality of the demand, right? So they pitch, the threshold is 80%, right? So if you can cross that 80%, then indeed there's substantial demand in that place. For
you must first have 50% of voters.
50% participating, right. And then of those participating, you must they must vote to approve it by 80%.
Right.
My sense is that if it was the intendment of the framers of that provision that the entire region, the pre-existing region, vote, what's the point of the 80%? I mean, then the 80% will operate as a veto as well, so that the entire region will essentially veto. There will be no new region creation. Okay. Either way, it appears rigged. Okay. Right. So I think that if there's any blame here, it should be on the framers of the Constitution. All right. But I do not think that the Supreme Court can be faulted. Of course, the court didn't even touch the question. I mean, yes. The second issue on which I converge with Professor Sari is that I think the court abdicated its responsibility by saying that there is nothing to interpret here, which is quite strange. Clearly, there's a divergence of opinion as to what this provision means. It's a case of first impression. It's never been decided. There's no precedent governing it. And then it comes to you. You are the only court with original jurisdiction.
They say the so-called divergence of opinion is self-inflicted.
How so?
It's self-confusion.
How so? It's not so plain.
Because
actually,
Article 5 is so plain as far as they are concerned.
You see, because even if, when you read Justice Brobe's report, the commission report, the commission says it recommends that the voting should be limited to. It didn't attempt to say that, this is, in our view, this is what the Constitution contains. It says it recommends, right? Somebody reads it differently. I mean,
but it refers to precedent. And says
it refers to
twice we have done it the same way.
Not relevant to this. I mean, it refers to international best practices and comparative cases and the like, and says that's how they're usually done. Right. And I think there's something to that. But clearly there is a division of opinion on this one amongst even lawyers, right? And so I don't know what it hurts the court. It's before you. It's a case of first impression. There is a division of opinion. Why can't you just tell us the answer? If it's so plain. I mean, it's such plain language. So I was a bit surprised that the court took this, because when you have cases like this that are politically contentious and you begin to act that way, then you give people the opportunity to say you are actually playing political games with the case. I mean, this matter is before you.
Okay.
Just decide
So
it.
I'll come to you to tell us whether you feel doing these creations is the way to development. But I actually wanted to intervene.
You're right. It's a very interesting decision of the Supreme Court, which says we won't do what you have asked us to do. But they ended up doing it.
Yeah, well,
because the court, you see, the preface was that we don't think this should be interpreted.
Yes.
But then they have to state why they don't think it should be interpreted. But in the process, they interpreted it. Didn't you see that when they said if it's from here, it's this people vote, if it's a merger, then the other people vote. So my point is that, the introduction was that we won't interpret. Yeah. But they had to justify why they won't interpret. So Justice Cote's judgment, then stated why they think the language is plain. In the process...
And interestingly, this is the panel of the new justices, newly appointed justices, with an addition.
That's what I'm saying. I don't want to look at it that way. But my point is that at the end of the day, they did tell us what their understanding of it was. And in fact, it ended up that the introduction wasn't really, the substance was deeper, because now they showed that the language wasn't that clear. Because they had to interpret the sub 5 and sub 6. Yeah. And so at the end of the day, we have an interpretation. So I'm just wondering why we went on to the discourse about, typically, don't come and waste our time. But that's why we are telling you not to waste our time, because this is what it means. So effectively, we have an interpretation. My worry about that interpretation is, how far can we take it? If I go to my village and I gather enough people in the area to say, this village wants to be a region, we can bring the petition. Yeah. If the Commission of Inquiry's duty is just to check whether there's sufficient demand, and they come there and they get and get 100% demand. That's right. Then we go to a referendum. Yeah. I'd love for my village to be a region, maybe even a country. So so maybe push to the extreme. We need to look at this Article 2 again, and the interpretation again. Okay. Not just the meaning of who votes. Okay. But what triggers the petition? Because there are two triggers: the petition or the president's own motion. Yes. So we need to look at that again. I think that maybe if the Supreme Court gets another opportunity, they need to look at what triggers even the entire process, because the entire process can be very well managed. If there are 50,000 of us in the town and want to be a region, I can show sufficient support and show need. Yeah. That we've been ignored. We don't get our fair share of the national. Okay. The next thing we have to ask us, and I'm sure we'll get there, that creating a region leads to development. The history of creation of regions in Ghana has given a religion. Regions in Ghana has led to development.
Okay, so we'll speak to that. And briefly, you at the time we spoke about this matter, you were actually unaware that there was a matter before the court. In fact, we're also not discussing the matter before the court. We're just discussing the matter as we was in the public domain. Yeah. And you were so emphatic, categorical, that the language is plain, and that there's no need.
That's clear.
Yes. Yes, and I agree with the Supreme Court that that there was no need. When they say there was no need, I understand it in law to mean that, I'm sure you know that before the Supreme Court embarks on interpretation, the legal requirement is that there must be ambiguity. So what I understood the Supreme Court to be saying is that if you look at the wording of the Constitution, there is no ambiguity. So they were making a legal determination that the words are clear and there is no ambiguity. But they did say what the clear words mean.
There's no ambiguity because, and let's emphasize, that the provision is that the commission that is set up to investigate and confirm whether there is need and substantial demand will be the one to indicate who votes, where the voting should take place. And they are mandated to do so. So yes, end of the story.
Exactly. Okay. So yes, and so I agree with the Supreme Court. There was no ambiguity. We may not like the recommendation that the commission made, but then I mean that's the recommendation that the commission has made, and unless we can fault the process of the making of the recommendation, what the commission made stands. So I to a very large extent agree with
so actually what the commission did, part of it was that for some of the areas, some of the communities that did not agree to the petition, they said they took them out. They said, we won't let you go through the process of voting, even though you are within this place. Yeah, we'll take you out, so you'll not be part of this new region.
Yeah.
So they took them out.
So you stay in the old region?
Yes. You stay in the old region.
That's correct.
That's what they did for them.
So what if you're on an island?
For a number of them.
It said for those cases, it said, we were unable to find substantial demand for a new region in these areas, in these municipalities and districts. And so they are not part of.
But this is interesting. So they all ended up being border line. I mean, there was not one in that corner which agreed with those at that corner. These are the questions that we are asking.
So for example, I think Wassa Menfi East, Wassa Menfi Central, Wassa Menfi West, said, well, we didn't find substantial demand there, so they all stay in the existing Western region. And then they found similarly, I think, somewhere in the Volta too.
area.
So essentially what you end up with a very pure enclave where the substantial demand is going to be really, really high.
See, that's why we need a situation where the Supreme Court will interpret substantial demand.
Okay, so let me quote them. In the Western North region, they said that the Commission was unable to establish substantial demand in the Wassa Amenfi traditional area, and for that reason, recommends the exclusion of Wassa Amenfi East, Wassa Amenfi Central, and Wassa Amenfi West districts from the proposed Western North region. They did a similar thing for the Uti region. They said that the Commission recommends the exclusion of Pandai district from the proposed OT region because they didn't find substantial demand.
It's interesting that they all fell within the border of it, so they could just redraw it.
Right. In the Brong Ahafu too, they said that the Commission recommends the exclusion of these two areas from the Ahafu regions, and these two areas were, let me just read it again. They said. The Commission could not establish substantial demand for the Ahafu Ano South District and Ahafu Ano North Municipality of the Ashanti region. Consequently, they should be excluded.
Samson, quickly on the petition. When it comes to even the petitioning of the district, I think that there's a gatekeeping to a very large extent in the sense that it doesn't just depend on the petition that you want a new region. If you make a petition that you want a new region, of course the Council of Elders, the Council of State must advise the President that, well, I think your petition is in order, and the President must be satisfied before he can even appoint a commission to that effect. So what it really means is that if you make a petition and the President doesn't like it,
I can make the President satisfied.
Okay. If the President is not satisfied,
so Prof, now let's get to this issue. Now they found that these were some of the major reasons. The major reasons for the creation.
That's correct.
Special extent of existing regions. Some of them, they are so far apart from the others, elongated nature and vastness in those districts. They speak about, they give an example that, for example, the distance between Sekondi, the capital of the Western region, and Adabokrom in the extreme north of the proposed Western North region is 289 kilometers, and it takes about 10 hours to cover this distance. They talk about Ketekrache, which is in the proposed Oti region, and they talk about the distance between that place and the Volta regional capital, which is 296 kilometers. It takes about 5.5 hours to travel the distance. Then they speak about road infrastructure that is non-existent. They talk about access to government and public services. These are the arguments they make. Economic and employment, empowerment and participation. Will the creation provide for these?
I don't think that's, I think that's an empirical question, right? So we've done region creation before. So the answer is really to do the necessary research and determine if indeed creation of regions has led in the past to remedying these kinds of deficits that the Commission observed. What I find interesting about the Commission's report on this particular issue of the need is essentially the Commission is saying that the central government in Ghana has failed at its duty, one, to decentralize appropriately, and has also failed to heed the constitutional injunction placed on it to ensure balanced development in the country, to ensure balanced development as between rural and urban, as between and among regions, as between different parts of a region. So if the problem is travel distance, if the problem is road infrastructure, I agree with that problem identification. But is the remedy the creation of region? If it's a road that they are lacking, put roads there. Right? It appears that there's a much more direct solution to the problem. Right? You've identified that the high courts and circuit courts and others are not sufficiently decentralized
post offices
to reach those places. What stops you from taking them there? Must there be a region before you? I mean, there's nothing that says you must first have a region before we give you a high court or a circuit court. There's nothing that says you must first have this before we take this government agency to your doorstep. So why not get on with the business of decentralization? Why not ensure that in the allocation of infrastructure that we heed the constitutional injunction to do it evenly, spread resources evenly, and the like? So for me, the problem identification is correct, I think.
Okay.
The solution, the remedy, is what I find a bit interesting, because there's a more direct way to solve the problem, which is do that which is missing. Supply the roads, and then it will cut the travel costs down. I mean, the reason why it takes 5 hours or 10 hours to travel from Sekandi to the outlying parts of the Western region is because of poor road infrastructure. It's not just the distance itself, right? It's because the road infrastructure is just not there. So just put roads there. And so I think that it's a very interesting way. In a sense, it's an indictment on government. When I read the report, that's the way I see it. It's saying that the central government in Ghana has not done a very good job these last 60 years of ensuring that the resources of the country are evenly distributed as between rural, urban, as between Accra and the rest of the country, as between different parts of different regions. You know, and I don't see, therefore, that this intermediate step of creating a region is the solution, especially when, in fact, we have now moved away from regions as the locus of development and are talking about districts.
Okay.
You know, so for me, it's the solution to, the wrong solution to the right problem.
Okay. Do you agree, because by the findings, the goal for the new regions is for enhanced socio-economic development of their areas?
I either deliberately or for some other reason didn't follow it for a while. When I started the reader, I adopted a word that Kwesi has used, and I've used, I became agnostic. But there are questions that one would ask. Look, since this nation was founded, and I'm going to get into more trouble, and I do not believe in the conspiratorial founders of this country. I think it's contrived. We African countries were forged in some German city years ago by white men who forged our countries and authorized their people to come and draw lines. And what we now call Ghana was actually the first 3 areas. The so-called Crown Colony, who signed the bond of 1844. Asante, which was which was captured by war, and the Northern Territories by agreements, by treaties. By the time the Burns Constitution put us together, it started from 1902, but by the time the Burns Constitution put us together as one country in 1946, none of these were the founders of Ghana. When Volta voted to join, after it was captured from the Germans as a result of war, right? they were not, so I think that whole thing, that founder thing, to me is contrived, The people on the ground, Ghana was in existence before you started your thing. How could you have founded something which preceded you? But that's another matter. I'm going to get into trouble for this. But look, we have had the regions. So there are the 3 regions. Then Volta joined. So gradually, they've been for political reasons. Yeah. Some of them have been for so-called development reasons. What is the history? Have development necessarily gone to a certain region because it's been created? Well, maybe Greater Accra has done very well for itself since 1982. In fact, Greater Accra was, in a sense, administered separately even before the formal separation from the Eastern region. Right? So maybe Greater Accra has done it. But was it because it was separated from the Eastern region? Between Central and Western, has any of them developed simply because a region? There's a fundamental problem. The issue is not the distance between the place and the regional capital. The issue is the distance between the place from Accra.
That's it.
Because I can assure you that there are areas within Greater Accra which significantly are farther away from Accra, not fiscal distance, but in the sharing of the national cake. Once we insist that everything must be centralized first, a story is told about two assemblymen having an argument somewhere in rural Ghana. And one said, I was voted by the people here. I represent the people here. They voted for me. The other person said, the people in Accra appointed me. Right? The people in Accra thought I was a wise man. I didn't have to go through a vote, and I've been appointed to be on the assembly. The issue is the distance from Accra. And so drawing up regions today will not shorten the distance if we don't have a development strategy that drops the development to the people, or sometimes it's even evolved from them. There's a town I love that I'm associated with. And I spoke there a couple of weeks back. And there was the issue of a clinic, spanking new clinic, put up by the people from Accra, with their representative in Accra, the district chief executive, who is actually a representative from Accra. He's not a representative of the people. Right. He's a representative from Accra. He's the local president. Put up nice spanking clinic. Nobody goes there. Why? The road to the clinic passes in front of the house of the fetish priest. And locally, they do not see how they can walk in front of that house to go to the clinic. You see how we are doing? So this place is as far away from Accra as anywhere else, because the development is coming from Accra. The people in Accra will come to us and read an address at the end of the year. There's a spanking new clinic in this village, but there's a social problem. Right. If we do not rethink the way we do our development processes, creating these new regions won't change anything. There are regions which have been created which are no better off than they were before they were created. That's true. And indeed, you cannot say that these developments were simply because the regions have been created. So my point is this. So for all of those who are clamoring for new regions, and I will not sit in Accra and say that there wasn't a clamor. I understand that on the ground, there was a demand for it. Right. When the CI gets to be passed, when Parliament resumes, and your attitude to work does not change, and we are still glorifying mediocrity and talking down progress, and we are pulling down people who can help the communities move on, and we are still doing the things we're doing. 10 years down the line, we may have 200 regions. They will all be undeveloped. We can turn every district into a region. It won't work. Okay. I understand, and there's a part of me that understands this. Professor Kumado wrote a paper years ago where he suggested we needed more regions than we had. Very interesting paper where he traced the history and constitutional evolution of regions and showed that we were still stuck in the colonial rule division of the country. That we are still effectively working for the colonial economy because this is how they chose to rule Ghana. And we have been unable to break forth for the shackles. If you look at the unfortunate triangle that is our railway, it is just to cart gold and cocoa and bauxite and whatever to the two harbors in Takrady and Tema to ship them out of the country. So, and after Gadgisberg put this in place for his queen, we have been unable to break out of the Gadgisberg shackles and economy. Even our education process is fundamentally still based on some of the things Gadgisberg said, which is not bad. So my point is this. Like I said, I'm agnostic. And if there's a demand and it's been created, that is great. But will it lead to development? I have not seen any research which shows a correlation between the creation of a region in Ghana and development. In fact, some of the writings suggest that there may not be. But my point is to the people on the ground. You are happy that you have a new region. You got to work for that region to have meaning. Else you just an insignificant region in Ghana, and the development will be happening in Accra and dictated by the people from Accra.
Okay. Now, Clara, you may be able to speak with some more evidence because of the region you come from, which is one of the not too old created ones, and walking through the main town and finding the road infrastructure. You'll be able to speak to that. But these two guys, they are already against what they say is a bloated government. 110 ministers. Guess what? I don't know what they are going to say to the president now.
They'll lose a half. The creation of new regions will disappear from regional integration.
So now,
it will still be doing
one region may have to go away. One ministry may have to go away. But in place of that, you're going to have 6 more, or you're talking about 12 more ministers and their deputies. But the constitutional injunction, as far as the development is concerned, is that Article 35, 35D, I think it's 5 or 35(6), says that the decentralization ought to happen. So that's what the government is doing, isn't it? It says the state has a duty to ensure that democracy becomes a reality through decentralization of administration and financial independence of these places. Do you believe that the finances will go as well?
Okay. Now, I think I should give a little bit, some small caveat in the sense that I grew up to read about the fact that the region had been created, but I didn't have any experience of it. I just grew, I have always known it exists, but I read and then found out when it was created and all of that. Now, I think when people say that creating regions brings development, what they are talking about is the small infrastructure in terms of district offices, regional offices, regional blocks. Those are the things they are looking at. And then, of course, once those offices are created, they will appoint people.
Right.
So they believe that, okay, it means that some of them will get jobs. So I think when people are talking about development, that is what they are talking about. So
in fact, the appointment is part of the arguments they made.
Oh, exactly. Right. So I do understand them because, of course, then they think, okay, we'll get a regional hospital. So we'll have more, we'll have access to some social services and some other infrastructure. So we should get, to a large extent, I understand what they are talking about when they say development. But like Ace and Prof have said, we have to go back to the drawing table and then find out whether this actually, what is development to us? Aside the buildings that we get, aside the appointments that will be made, what is in it in terms of the totality of the people? I think that for me, I don't want to go there because I have a very big beef sitting, and it's linked to what Ace talked about our economy. I think that since independence and after independence, we have done nothing to really determine our own destinies. We've just been running with what the colonial system, and that is really the cause of a lot of our economic problems that we sit and we talk plenty. Because anytime I go to the market and then I find out that imported carrot is a lot cheaper than local carrot. And then sometimes we think it's pride that I can afford local carrot. There's a problem. Because if we are running our economy well, that shouldn't happen. That shouldn't happen if we are running our economy well. So when Kobe is more expensive than sardines, there's a big problem. So when it comes to the real development, I think it's for another day. I think we have a fundamental problem, and that is really the system we have chosen to run, which is the colonial system, that we haven't done anything to even tinker with. We have not tinkered with it. We have just been running about it, and we should, I don't know what word to use, but okay, let me just say that we haven't thought hard enough. And we haven't worked hard enough. So the development, in terms of real development, I don't think it is the creation of regions that is going to bring real development. Because if we are going to talk about access to services and access to goods and services, the centralization of everything still running in Accra is not going to stop with the recreation of the...
Including significantly the centralization of the revenues of this country. I mean, so constitutionally, the government is enjoined only to send, what, 5%? I mean, minimum 5% to District Assembly Common Fund.
Is that going down now? Yeah.
So it means that constitutionally, the elites in Accra, the state managers in Accra, get to decide politically how to divvy up the other 95% by politics. What if, I mean, real development for me would be something like saying, look, we are actually going to lock in, not 5%, but something upwards of, say, 25%, maybe 40%. We will commit to take the money of the revenue that we generate in this country. We will commit to send 40% to where people actually live their lives, which is the districts.
But if you
do something as bold as that, then I'll see that we're actually sending money.
Even that amount, the purchases are done from here in Accra.
Exactly.
And you receive letters that tell you that this is coming to you.
Exactly. So in short, the problem with our development is the centralization of everything from the central government. We have district assemblies, but this hasn't actually cured the centralization problem because sometimes they are told what to do more or less from central government. So we have to go back to the way we do our central.
That's $170 million that's supposed to go to a constituency.
But the constituency is not an administrative unit of government.
But this is one of the critical questions that we
so
should have been asking. That how is this going to work out? So my point, though, like I said, let's hope this works. I haven't seen a correlation between creating a region and the region getting development, unless the people there are prepared to either speak up, do their work well, work hard for the region to become a symbol of pride. Then we can say, oh, look, I want to move to go and live in Bono East. Because the people of Bono East are so hardworking that they've built an economy that's probably not even dependent on the central economy. But until we do that, this is just, it's just more colors on our map.
Okay. So